Hello again, GiraniCon. Again, thank you all so much for being here today. Our 4 o'clock panel is starting, so yes, please bring your cheesecake and come have a seat. So our 4 o'clock panel today is going to be talking about really the genesis of how and why we are all here in the first place, which is comics and comic books. So to talk about creating a comic, creating a web comic, we have local celebrity Chris Flick here to talk to us.
Hey everybody.
Hi. So Chris is a web and graphic designer by day and a web cartoonist and convention artist by nights and weekends. Many of you have probably seen him in all of our favorite local cons.
Awesome Con, Baltimore. If people around here might be in Fredericksburg, you see me at free comic book day at Little Fish Comics, all over the Pennsylvania, Virginia, Maryland area.
Yep. Chris has been doing Capes and Babes, which I'm sure you've all seen, since 2007, and he started tabling at cons in 2008. He's also one of the members of the Webcomic Alliance, which is a group of artists that record 2 podcasts every month where they talk about the creation of webcomics and the business of going to cons and conventions. Chris also has a new book collection out, so make sure after the panel is over to stop by his table and ask him about it. But for now, please, again, let's welcome Chris Flick to GiraniCon.
Okay, everybody. So, like we just talked about, I've been doing. I created the comic strip back in 2007. I did a comic strip in college, and then years went by, and I didn't do anything with it. And then webcomics started getting really big around 2000, and then I waited 7 years to start my own thing, and after that, about a year after that, I started going to conventions and selling all my stuff that you see on the table. Actually, not everything you see on my table. I had very little of my first year, but as the comic grew and I kept getting more product, my table kept expanding, and so yeah, now I have four books and a best of Capes and Babes. And Capes and Babes is about a werewolf who hangs out at a comic book shop, because there's enough vampire crap out there. Werewolves needed more love.
They need a lot more love. I agree with you. Too much vampires. No offense, but do you want to just tell us a little bit more about the comic and some of the adventures?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll talk a little bit about the process too. So a lot of creators up here so far have been talking about financing and how do you get into it and stuff like that. Well, the nice thing about comics these days is that webcomics allow, if you have an internet connection, if you have a website, if you have a blog, you can produce your own comic strip. That's the great thing about it. The process is very simple. You draw your comic strip either digitally or somehow. You create your comic somehow, either on paper, digitally, something like that. Then you upload it to your website, and then you go, hey, my comic's up here, go read it. And that's really about it. And then when you get enough strips in your archive, you have enough, for me, for all my books are, when I get 200 strips, that's time for another book. So I've been doing this strip every Monday, Wednesday, Friday from when I started out in 2007. They were very consistent, cranking them out, and then it takes about a year and a half to get 200 strips, and then you put it in book form. That's the Cliff Notes version of how you can do it. So I've taught a lot of classes, cartooning and stuff like that, and they go, how do you do it? That's how you do it. We talk a lot about this on the Webcomic Alliance podcast. It's free, a free website, webcomicalliance.com. We do 2 free podcasts every month, and we talk about either creating the comic strip. There's 5 different creators all across the United States, and we talk about different trials and tribulations that we're having, either finding readers, doing Kickstarters, going to conventions, how to increase our readership, all across the board. And sometimes we ask each other problems that we're having. Oh, I'm not feeling very creative. How do I jumpstart my stuff? Things like that. The same problems that other creators might be having, we talk about it every 2 weeks.
So when it comes to creating a webcomic specifically, what does it take? What are the nuts and bolts of what it takes to start a webcomic?
Okay, so really there's two different types of webcomics. There's long form and there's short form. Long form is just like a comic book. It's like a comic book page. It's long. It sounds exactly what it says. Long form. It takes a long time to process because it takes a long time to create, and eventually the story gets told, and then you put it into a comic book form. The short form, like I do, is a comic strip. Comic strips are really easy to crank out. They're just like the newspaper stuff, only they're on the web. One of the reasons why webcomics are so popular is because it's really, really hard to get syndicated in newspapers. There's Peanuts is still running in the newspaper. Charles Schulz has been dead for 20 years, and he's still the strip is still running in the newspaper. That's a strip that's taking up space for a new creator that's live that can't actually get into the paper. So the option is, why do I need the newspaper? I can just publish it on the web, and you become your own entity. Just we had a couple of filmmakers up here and other creators that are talking about getting your stuff out. The hard part is getting people to now. In the newspaper, you already have a set readership because they subscribe to the newspaper, they get it. The web, you got to beg and plead and go on social media, and once it's created, you got to say, hey, come look at my stuff, come look at my stuff, come look at my stuff. It's similar to Kickstarter, but you're not actually begging for money, you're just begging for eyeballs. So that's where a lot of the hard work comes into play. Once you create the strip, it's easy. But then it's getting people to come to your strip and find it and say, hey, oh, check this guy out, or check this girl out. That's a great thing about webcomics, too, is that webcomics now are a fantastic resource for female creators. My daughter's an artist. Webcomic Alliance has four female creators and 2 guys. I'm one of the guys. So in that sense, we're kind of me and Byron Wilkins are a minority. With the other four creators, Don Griffin, Liz Stanley, Christina, and Robin Childs are fantastic female creators, and I encourage women to, if you're, how hard it is in comic books. It's like, oh, there's no female creators. That's always been a myth. There's been fantastic comic book creators, but it seems like in the web comic field, women are just it's a really super popular medium for women creators to get their feet wet.
So aside from, obviously someone to draw it, somebody to write it, and maybe a social media platform, what are some other, things that people would need to get started, and what are some things that people forget that you might need? They think, oh, I have an idea, I have a writer, I have a cartoonist, but then they forget I need this.
Okay. Okay. Well, first of all, there's another couple of different ways you can go too. I've heard people go, oh, I'm a writer, I can't draw, what happens? Or I'm an artist, but I can't write. Well, you find somebody who can do. You find your partnership. Now, I do everything. And everybody on the Webcomic Alliance, we all do our own things. We write and draw ourselves, so we don't have that problem. But in terms of creating stuff, you got to have a cast of characters first. That's the most important thing. You gotta sit down and it's like anything else, like building a house. You just don't build a house. You got to plan it, or you got to build the foundation. The foundation is your characters. Write your characters out, little bio, sketch them, do a character design. Before I created the werewolf character, I made pages of sketching, because I also knew that I was going to be drawing this character 3 times a week, so I wanted to try. How many of you guys are fans of animation? Okay, so that was my idea with this character, with this werewolf character, was I was thinking about animation, try to make it as simple as I possibly can because I'm going to be cranking it out 3 times a week, so I needed to make it as simple as I possibly could. And that's the secret for me, was to make all my characters as easy and simplified to draw. People, I have on my table, I draw people as cartoon werewolves, and they're amazed that I can do that. So, but I've been drawing werewolves for 9 years now. I can draw anything as a werewolf. So, it's the same character, it's the same concept. I simplified it down, and I just kept perfecting the technique so I can crank out these strips, almost with my eyes shut.
And so, writers, a cartoonist, the platform. So you've now got a good 6 months to a year's worth of web material, and you're like, oh, now I want to compile this. All that other stuff, fairly inexpensive, but how do you make the financial jump from having a web comic to then wanting to compile it in book or comic form or, yeah?
Great question, because I'm going to backtrack a little bit. If you decide to make a comic strip and you have in your mind that somewhere down the road that you want to put it in print, you have to do, and this is where my web designing skills come into play. You need to create 2 different files. You need a print file, a high resolution print file, and it gets really kind of technical. And if you guys have any technical questions, come by my table. I'll explain it in more detail. But basically, you need a high resolution image, and then that's your print strip, and you need a web resolution strip, and that's your web comic. A lot of people make the mistake that they do a low resolution strip and they're cranking them out, and then they go to print and it looks crappy because they didn't use the right resolution. So it's really important that's how I do everything. Everything has every strip has 2 different files, a high resolution and then a web version. Then there's a whole lot of different resources for cranking out books. You can do what's called print on demand, or you can go to a printer and get a whole bunch of books printed. And the 2 different costs about that is print on demand is exactly what it says, print on demand. Let's say I only wanted to print out 5 books for a convention, I only had to pay for 5 books. So it's cheaper in the long run, or short term. But in the long term, it probably would be cheaper if I printed out a whole bunch of books, but it costs more up front. Does that make sense? It's like anything else. It's like Costco. You go to 7-Eleven, you buy a little tiny jar of mayonnaise, and it's $4. You go to Costco, you buy 5 gallons, and it's $4. It's sort of the same concept.
So then, what would be the best ways that somebody could go about? Would you suggest for maybe a first printing that somebody just go out of pocket?
Yeah, I mean that's what I do. I mean, there's again, if you're interested in doing a fundraising like a Kickstarter or something like that, I'm going to do another little plug for a friend. I am always, James will tell you, I am always plugging my friends. So, if I can give them help in any other way, you scratch my back, I scratch your back. Robin Childs on the Webcomic Alliance has her own little company where she gives advice to creators on how to set up their own Kickstarter, and she's just fantastic at it. So you can finance your book that way too. I've never done that. It's just because I'm lazy. It's faster and easier. I save up my money and I go, okay, I want 25 books. I just go to the place I get my books. I put them. I go to a place called CreateSpace, CreateSpace.com, and it's a sister company of Amazon. The nice thing about that is once you get your book printed through CreateSpace, and they have a whole documentation of how they show you all the directions of how to get your stuff up online. Once it's up on CreateSpace, it's already automatically up on Amazon.com. So if you go to Amazon.com and you type in Chris Flick, you'll see my 5 books and 2 other books that I wrote for web design.
So, me as a consumer, when I get a lot of my web comics through Reddit. I don't know if anybody else, I find a lot of really cool stuff on Reddit. somebody will post a panel, and then I go through the rabbit hole of looking at all their previous comics. One of my favorites is, I don't know if anybody heard this, Chief O'Brien at Work. It's a Star Trek themed one, and it's really simple and it's really stupid, but it's great. But then I also have to ask myself, you know, if they came out with a book, an entire book, and I've read all the panels, what then as a consumer is my incentive to buy a book of a comic that I have already read all the panels of?
Great question. Another, fantastic thing. Almost every comic book creator, web comic creator who has a trade paperback, what we like to do is we like to put what we call extra content in the book that you can't get anywhere else online. It's not part of our website. It's not anything. Maybe free, sketches that we've done. Maybe there's for tips and tricks. For this book, for my greatest hits book, on the back in the content, all the free content is if you're interested in knowing what the ins and outs of convention life is. It's all my tips and tricks that I've learned and done through since 2008 going to conventions. It's basically how to go to conventions. So that's an incentive to, oh wow, I didn't see this on the website, or how do I draw the characters, or maybe there's a cool hit backstory that's only in books. So you have to kind of do some extra work in order to get to make it more cool for consumers to go, oh wow, that I've read the comics, but I've never seen this before.
And jumping into conventions, cons specifically, let's say you've got a person who's got this idea for a character, an original character, not fan art, and they want to jump in, whether they have a webcomic or not, they want to jump into selling originals, selling prints at a convention, much like James did. What would be the way that they could tell themselves, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be a part of a convention scene. What do they need to know before they jump in as an artist creating original art at a convention?
You subscribe to the Webcomic Alliance podcast.
Okay.
That's the easy way. But yeah, well, first, you have to go to, there's lots of, Facebook is a fantastic resource. There's lots of convention groups that you can do searches for. You join those groups and you say, hey, I'm interested in doing this. Me, I did it the hard way. I just went around and asked other artists that I liked, like, hey, how do you do, even though I had been going to conventions as fans for many years, I had no clue, how do you buy a table? How do you get into a convention? You have to talk to somebody, and it's amazingly easy. A lot of shows, you just, like James, you go to his website, you find something about Facebook, and you go, hey, this is a cool little event. How do I become a part of it? And and then the organizers will say, hey, a table costs $25 or $50, or in the bigger shows like AwesomeCon, they can get up to $200 or $300. The mistake a lot of people make is that I'll do this really, really quick. This was when I started conventions, I knew that I didn't have a whole lot of content, so I wasn't looking to make a whole lot of money. I've said this on the podcast a lot. I had a sort of a 5-year kind of plan. To the first year, I was gonna, whatever show I went to, I was gonna make my table back. That was a success in my eye.
And when he says by making the table back, whatever he pays for the table, he makes that much.
Right.
During the course of the convention.
Right. So if a table is $25 on a small little show, all I have to do is make $25, and I was a success at that show.
Broke even. Yeah.
Right. So the next year, but see, I lost money because I didn't count food, I didn't count travel, and I didn't count hotel. So the next year it was make my table back, make my hotel back. Third year, make my hotel back, or make my table, hotel, food. Third year, make my hotel, table, food, travel. Fifth year, I was self-sufficient, where I was making a profit after all of those other factors were kicked in. So I didn't have this concept of, oh, I'm going to go to conventions and I'm just going to make money and we're going to do that. It's a long process. So you have to be realistic about what you can do, and you build up. Like I said, my first year, in fact, I didn't even have I had 80 comics online. That wasn't enough to put in a book. So I made my own books. What do you mean? What do you mean make your own books, Chris? Well, I did this thing called mini comics. Mini comics was I went to Kinko's and I went to Staples and I printed out a whole bunch of my comic strips and I folded them in half and I stapled them and I sold them for $2 a piece. That's what I did. So, you can be done, and there's things online. If you Google mini comics, there's lots of ways that there's to show you how to make your own web comic. Or, make your own mini comic. So it can be done. You just have to, the internet is a great resource of information like that.
Now, you said it took about 5 years from when you started tabling at cons. So 2008 and 2013, you became self-sufficient. That first year of cons, or I guess first year and a half of cons, were you surprised by, or maybe the lack of, were you surprised by people that would come up to your table and say, oh my gosh, Capes and Babes, I love this webcomic. What was that like when all of a sudden people are seeking you out to try to come find you as an artist? And, obviously you're putting out a piece of art so people can see it, but is it still surprising when people kind of are like, oh my God, it's Chris Flick?
Yeah, that's a fantastic feeling. It's fantastic when people say, like when I go to Little Fish Comics in Fredericksburg and they go, oh, I drove so-and-so. Like a couple years ago, my wife and I have friends who own a pizza shop in Quantico, and I decided to do a premiere of the book. And I decided to have a book signing at this pizza shop. Talked to the owners, and we set something up. We had a nice little deal where I had supplied pizzas and sodas for everybody. And I didn't expect. I just expected my friends, my immediate friends, to show up. It's Quantico, but one of my really loyal readers went all the way out from way out in Maryland, drove all the way out there to come to for the exclusive book signing, and that was like, wow, this is amazing. I mean, it was only one person who did that. Most of them were local, but you do get that feeling. And I should backtrack also now. For conventions, I would caution people to do slow, build up. I didn't do that. I was 35 when I decided to get into conventions, and I didn't want to wait anymore. And I went to the biggest one. One of the biggest ones on the East Coast was Heroes Con. It's a really big one, and I didn't think I would make any money because I'm a nobody, and you have people like George Perez and big name artists that are all fighting for the same dollar, and I didn't have anything on my table. I had these little $2 mini comics, but hey, I made $200. I made my table back. I was a success. But it was a huge thing where I had other creators come up to me and say, hey, they like my stuff, and it was like, wow, hey, when you get a badge on when you go to a big convention, they'll normally give you an artist alley badge or an exhibitor badge. When you have that around your neck, it makes it for me, in my mind, it changed perspective. I was no longer a fan. I was accepted by the industry, and it was just a total different attitude I felt behind the table instead of being a fan coming up, oh gosh, I love your work. That's great. And I was still a fan, but being behind the table was such a huge difference. And I came home, and my wife's sitting over there. She could tell you the 3-day show. I came back, and I was just jazzed. I said, this is something that I love. I was both happy and pissed off at myself because I didn't do it sooner. And I've loved it ever since. And that's why we do the podcast and all this other stuff. Give advice to other creators about, and I talked to James about this. I'm jazzed about if I can help somebody with all my mistakes, all the more power.
Sure. I want to go back really quick to when you talked about somebody having an idea for a webcomic, and it's a great idea, and they have, you know, the idea in their head of a joke, the punchlines, and they've got the outline down pat. Somebody who's got this great character in their mind, but they can't write. So what are some, how do people go about finding the resources for someone to draw? I mean, you said go find someone, but how do you go find someone who can draw out your vision? How do you go find someone who can write out your vision? Like, what do we do?
Okay, so professionally, on a professional level, there's payment. There's got to be payment involved. There, writers are always looking for artists, and I know it sucks, but it's reality, and it takes a long time to draw, and it takes all that stuff. It's like, oh, I got this really great idea. I'm gonna write it. You draw it. There's no money involved. You know, that sort of stuff. Unfortunately, that's just how it is sometimes. But you can find partnerships. You can find a friend that hey, let's do this together. You can go to conventions. That is a great way to cut costs, is finding a friend who might be a writer, you're the artist, or vice versa. Get together, hammer out some ideas, see if you guys are both jazzed about the project, and then you guys can go to conventions together. You can share hotels, you can share expenses, you can share travel, all that other stuff. If you don't have that, you can go to websites like Pencil Jack and Facebook and say, hey, I'm looking for somebody to help me with my project. You might or might not find somebody willing. It's just it's kind of like dating, I guess. Like, hey, you want to get together, you want to create something, you might strike out, you might hit a home run.
So to kind of wrap things up a little bit, tell everyone how and when, whether it was in your teens, your 20s, when did you realize that you wanted to draw cartoons?
That was like 4 years old.
Oh.
Okay, so the little story I always tell is my grandmother used to sit me down way back when. Hardee's used to have these glasses, Warner Brothers glasses with the Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck and stuff like that. And she, in order to shut me up and keep me quiet, I guess, she would sit down and say, hey, here's the glass, draw Daffy Duck. And she would give her very precious typing paper, because back then that was the only paper that didn't have lines, and she loved typing, but she would give me a couple sheets of typing paper, and I would sit down there and draw all the different characters on all the classic mugs that she had collected from Hardee's. So,
those collector's mugs were where it was at.
Yeah, so I was drawing 4 years old, and like I said before, I got to college, and I did a comic strip for a little while, but I petered out because I was taking classes and stuff like that. So I was actually worried about that when I decided that I'm going to do a comic strip. I knew what it took already, and I knew when I was 19 and 20, I couldn't deal with the deadlines. I was too lazy. But then again, that goes back to making sure that the characters were super, super easy to draw, so I could crank them out. And that's that's the knowledge, that's the experience that comes into play.
Well, thank you so much for answering my questions. Maybe we can take one question if somebody has a question for Chris, from anyone out there.
Just yell them so I can hear.
Yeah.
Huh?
I think they're just yelling. Well, for me, those are the questions I had, and I was very interested in figuring out exactly what you do and how you do it. So thank you so much for being here at JiraniCon today. Everyone, please make sure to visit Chris's table. It's right over here. Talk to him about Capes and Babes and his new book. But please, everyone, give a round of applause for Chris again for joining us today.
Thank you, guys. Again, if you want to come to my table and ask me any questions, go ahead.